This is All Night Nippon Super Mario Bros. That I picked up recently on eBay. Released only on the Famicom Disk System, it's a sort of remixed version of Super Mario Bros. That Nintendo did as a promotional tie-in with the Japanese radio show All Night Nippon, which, like Nintendo, is still around today. Fascinating as this game is, it's not what this video is about. No, you see, this is a bootleg copy of this game. Not that I'm complaining, I knew that when I bought it. Genuine copies are rare and expensive, which this wasn't. It's what I found on the other side of this disc, the B-side. That's what I want to talk about. And okay, it does say side A, but let's not worry about it. What on earth could this be? Let's load it up. Well, looks like the original Super Mario Bros. That would make sense. But it's not, it's something else. A fairly trippy, hacked version, I guess, of the original. This might be the day that Mario had one mushroom too many, cause this gets weird. And okay, Mario games were always weird, let's say weirder. So what on earth is this? Where did it come from? It's weird, but it does seem to be a fully comprehensive hack of the entire game with some very clever use of the play mechanics. And I know what you're going to say, well, so what, another hack of Super Mario Bros. There's thousands of them online, but, well, this is a cut above. Original, inventive, difficult, but fun to play. It's got it all, one of the most entertaining hacks of any game I've ever come across. It's not quite up there with Kaizo Mario levels of terrifying difficulty, but for an amateur like me, that's no bad thing. I do feel like an actual unaugmented human could complete this with enough dedication. Now I know there will be some people watching this who will recognise this right away because, obscure as it is, this game is not completely unknown to science. I had a hard time identifying this though. Yes, I did find its origin in the end, but it is a surprising one. When I first went looking for this online, I drew a blank. The disc just says Family Computer Disk System Super Mario Bros. In Japanese. This is definitely not the original B-side, I know that, and the seller I bought this from was no help either, but looking in the usual places online didn't really offer any clues. There's very few hacks or edited versions of Famicom Disk System games out there at all, and nothing I could see that matched this oddity. What I need to do is dump this disc, make a copy to my PC so I can study its habits, run it in an emulator, but how can I do that? The most reliable way would be to use something like the FDS stick, which, amongst other things, lets you easily copy Famicom discs via USB. Not massively expensive or hard to find, but I don't have one, and I want to do this now. There is another way though, via the power of sound, and all I'll need is a flash cartridge and some way of recording, because this is the NES Tape Dumper by the very talented Chris Cavell. It takes NES and Famicom games on cartridge and on disc and converts them into audio that you can record and recover the data from. Let me just demonstrate, it is pretty weird. I've got the audio out of my AV modded Famicom connected to my tape recorder. It's called a tape dumper. Of course, I'm going to try dumping it to actual audio tape. This isn't necessary, but it does make it a bit more interesting. So I've copied the tape dumper onto my flash cartridge. Now I just need to run it like it was any other type of NES or Famicom software. This is dead simple. Then select the disk option here, press A, and there's more options, but I'll just leave all these on the default setting. Now it's time to pull out the cartridge. Yes, rip it right out and insert the Famicom disk adapter. This doesn't always work every time, but let's give it a go. So now, making sure I'm recording this, I hit the start button, and the disc is being dumped to audio cassette. The switch to a completely blank screen and the disk drive activity light being the only indication that this is doing what it should. So what exactly is happening here? Well, you see, this clever program copies itself into the NES's RAM and runs itself from there, so even when the cartridge is removed, it stays running. Ideally anyway. Often in practice pulling the cart seems to cause a crash, but once it is working it reads the data either in the cartridge you've put in, or in this case the disc that's been inserted, and sends it out as sound through the standard sound output. If you're wondering what that sounds like, well, it sounds like this. Yeah, that's going to be pretty familiar to anyone who remembers cassette-based home computers from the 80s, and this works on the very same principle. In fact, it uses the Kansas City standard encoding developed in the 70s as a way for early home computers to store data on cassette tapes. It was never that much of a standard, but many systems, the ZX Spectrum, the Commodore 64, ended up using something similar. Now, the default settings send this out at 300 bits per second, which is not a lot of bits, so it takes 40 minutes to turn this whole disc into audio. That's more than I would expect it to be for a 64K disc image, and I don't know why, but I don't really suppose it matters. I could select a higher bitrate and do this quite a bit quicker, but this is the safest option. The lower the bitrate, the easier the data will be to recover, and it's not like I'm in that much of a hurry. So after waiting around for 40 minutes, I now have an audio cassette recording, which I can then play back into my PC sound interface. And yes, I could have just done that in the first place. This is a pointless extra step, but I just want to see what happens when I use an actual tape. So I've got my laboriously created audio file. Now I need to convert it into a disk image that I can run in an emulator. To do this, I used the program suggested in the Tape Dumper manual, an old DOS utility that I had to run in DOSBox, but that just turned out to be the easiest way. Does it work? No, it doesn't. Okay, maybe I need to edit the audio file to get rid of the sound of me starting the tape, plus the noise at the end. And now let's try that. It seems to have come up with something. I've set it to save it with the right file extension. Let's try it in an emulator. And yep, that works. Yeah, I really thought that was going to be a lot more hassle than it was, but well, it turned out to be very easy, miraculously. But before I go any further though, can I just ask you to subscribe if you haven't already, and maybe hit that like button too. And if you really want to help me out, well, you can join my Patreon. The address is on the screen right now, and there's a link below. Just $1 would be great. Okay, now we're playing this weird hack in the Messen emulator. I can use some cheats and explore some things that I haven't got the skills or patience to do otherwise. Does this help track down its origin? Well, not right away. A couple of things to note though. It does have the level select cheat enabled from the start. This lets you select from any of the 8 worlds to play from the title screen, but it also lets you go beyond that and explore some very glitched out worlds after that. If you've seen my video on this subject, or more likely Retro Game Mechanics Explains video, you'll know about this from the original game. And from this, and also just from looking at the files on the disc, I can tell you that this is definitely based on the original Super Mario Bros., which was released like many other classic Nintendo games on disc. So this is different from All Night Nippon Super Mario Bros., which was based on Super Mario Bros. 2, aka The Lost Levels. And it seems like, well, this must be a recent thing, right? It has to have been done by someone with access to modern tools, disassemblies, all the info out there on the web. ROM hacks have been around forever. I remember seeing them on pirate multicarts when I was a youngster years ago, but early ROM hacks tended to be dead simple. Cheats enabled, starting at a different level, not stuff like this. This has to be part of the modern ROM hacking scene, right? I'm still drawing a blank online though. Well, what tool did they use to make this hack? That might help me out. There's a few classic Mario Brothers hacking tools out there, including this very nice looking one called Greet Ed. Are there any that allow you to edit the disc version of Super Mario Brothers? No, not that I can find, unless we're talking about this thing called the Tonkachi Editor. It runs on the Famicom disk system itself, and it's very old. It may well be that this came out way sooner than I ever thought it could do. This isn't just an early hack of Super Mario Brothers, it's the first. This is Tonkachi Mario. In 1987, a company called Aitsu released what they called the Tonkachi Editor, a disc that let you edit not just Super Mario Brothers, but any Famicom disc. This is it in action, and it turns out to be a sort of hex editor that lets you edit the files on a disc, either as hexadecimal values, ASCII text, or the disassembled machine code as assembly language. No graphical user interface, just the raw data, and all operated solely with the control pad, but this would be enough to modify or even completely rewrite a game. To help you out, it came with an extensive and apparently error-strewn manual, which I can't find a copy of, which included a primer on programming in assembly language and info on the inner workings of the Famicom. There are plenty of modern versions of this sort of tool which are much easier to use and easier for me to show you what this is able to do. If I open the disk image of Super Mario Bros. In a modern hex editor, I can make changes to the data in the same way as the Tonkachi Editor. Editing a few level layout values turns stage 1-1 into this slightly messed up castle, and if you were patient and had the skills, you could do stuff like this and much more with the Tonkachi Editor. And that's where this weird version of Mario comes from. It was the demo, it was the example project included with the editor package. Not as is and ready to run, but the data and instructions necessary to patch your own copy of Super Mario Bros. On disk to avoid any copyright issues. Most game hacks are still distributed this way today, though modern patching tools makes it all much easier. It must have taken an absolutely massive effort to disassemble and then rewrite Super Mario Bros. With such limited resources, which just makes this even more impressive. They must have spent hours, days just figuring out how it worked. They clearly had a detailed knowledge of the smallest details of Super Mario Bros. And this isn't after years of collaborative work online, but very soon after the game was first released. Did anything else get the same treatment? Was the Tonkachi Editor widely used by fans? Well, maybe, but it's really not well documented. There was a magazine published by the developers with lots of hacking tips in there, including info on many other games, though all I can find is low-res screenshots and machine-translated info from a Japanese blog. Apparently Japan had quite an active game hacking scene in the 80s, but well now only the briefest traces of it can be found online. It reminds me of the classic Jet Set Willy on the ZX Spectrum, which saw many mods, edited versions back in the 80s in the UK, though loads more of these hacks still survive today. So yeah, I've got to say I am slightly disappointed I haven't uncovered anything that's totally unknown and never seen before, because this really isn't, but I am pleased to have found out the origin of this very weird Mario game and also learned something about the Tonkachi Editor, the very much unlicensed, unofficial early ancestor of Mario Maker. I know a lot of you are going to want to try out Tonkachi Mario, and well, I don't think it'd be a good career move for me to distribute my copy of it, but I will say I am absolutely not the first person to dump this game, and if you go searching online for Tonkachi Mario, you definitely will find it. And as for the tape dumping thing, well, that worked far better and far easier than I ever imagined it could do. It really did work for me the very first time I tried it. I thought it was going to be difficult and finicky, but it really wasn't. I'll put a link below to the app I used and the amazing NES Tape Dumper. Hats off to Chris Cavell, I hope I'm saying your name right. There's more links to stuff in the description if you're interested, and I can't of course forget to thank my wonderful Patreons. Thank you guys, your support is much appreciated. So that's where I'm going to leave this for now, and I will say thank you for watching and goodbye.